have some time.
Mr. Nader, now of course the stock market is one of the parts of the Egyptian economy most likely to see the impact from the US downgrade. What other sectors of the economy are likely to be affected by the American as well as the other sectors and the countries that you mentioned?
Fortunately, this is the only sector to witness the worst impact. The other would see the better impact. Regarding the drop of the dollar would give a little bit shake for the tourism industry, as our currency might get up a little bit in the face of the dollar, so it might be considered a little bit expensive. Accordingly, the vacations here in Egypt regarding the US tourists would be considered a little bit more expensive than they used to have it. And this was a very good advantage we have been having during the past years. However, thankfully we are having another part would compensate for this shake, which is exports. When the US, which is the imports. When the US dollar drops a little bit in the face of the Egyptian pound, this would help to control more inflation because the raw material and imports would be in lower cost. So we could we could have more imports, we could have more production, help us to have more salaries, meeting most of the demands that currently being held in the protests in the streets.
Right. Now, sir, tell me, how far do you think that investors took their cue from other international markets and investors taking a beating, of course, on the fears that the downgrade in the US credit rating could trigger a new global recession? Do you think it's a snowball effect?
That's a very hard question, actually. It's needed a professorate degree study to answer it. However, if we went through the past 50 years, we would see it might come to the fact that it is a snowball effect. Yes. However, the impact of this snowball or how much is this snowball big would not be determined now. We need to see how would be the impact and the behavior of the East Asian countries, especially China, Mongolia, Taiwan, Singapore, Malaysia, and such countries, because these countries are dependent on tourists and foreign reserve and trading relations with the US. For example, China having more than 50% of its international reserve in sovereign debt of the US, which means it might be hurt very much if these bonds or these sovereign debts have been devalued due to the downgrade of the
US credit
rating. However, this cannot be determined now. I don't want to make such pessimistic expectations, but according to the past crises that has been coming during the past 50 years, we still need to see, or we still will see, another crisis or another shake-off or another earthquake, if I might say it like this, during the coming 3 to 4 years. Our first shake was the mortgage crisis in the US, which of course led to the debt crisis in the Eurozone, which of course replied again in the same time with the debt crisis in the US, because the mortgage crisis was dependent on the money that has been given from the banks, independent and private banks and sovereign banks or state banks in the Eurozone and in the US to mortgage companies. These companies weren't able to pay back, and the construction companies and building material companies weren't able to produce much more as they used to have in the past. Accordingly, the money flow in payment back and paying back wasn't as good as the past times. Accordingly, they would have a drop in their cash flow. Accordingly, we have seen the crisis. So if these banks having this problem, accordingly, they won't be able to lend anymore. So when Basel III comes to action by late this year or by late coming year, there might be a little bit shake-off again in the banking and in the finance and investment sector regarding these regions, including, of course, the regions that depending in their industries on internal components such as China, Taiwan, Malaysia, Singapore, and Japan, because they are producing the internal parts and being assembled in other countries. If the countries cannot finance their investments in Far East, how would they would be able to assemble their products and sell it?
Right.
Which means we will have a drop down in the global production, having a little bit more slowdown in the global economy. However, I think the coming meetings for the G20, the G8, and the Davis Economic Forum would have to discuss these issues intensively to avoid a long-time recession, such ones that we witnessed
yes.
during the 30s of the past century.
Right. Now, back home, on Sunday, of course, the Egyptian stock market lost more than 4%, whilst on Tuesday, the benchmark shed nearly 5% or 15.8 billion Egyptian pounds at the beginning of the session, which, of course, led to the temporary shutdown, halting the session for 30 minutes. Now, let's, in layman terms, talk what happened to lead to this collapse. Was it just investors selling? Is that basically...
Just a domino effect. Foreigners having big orders, giving their selling orders. There were fears from this selling, so there were no buyers. Accordingly, you're having a huge supply and no demand.
That's as
simple as that.
So what measures can be taken in the future to protect the stock market from this happening again, as well as to restore investors' confidence in the sector?
Before we answer this question, we have to ask ourselves a very important question. Do we want to have a developed and mature capital market or not? If we want to have one such capital market, so we have to accept the fluctuation, because there is no capital market cannot reflect the fears and the greeds of the people who are trading in it. There are no measures to be taken completely to prevent anyone from selling his position or from buying a new position, because if I did so,
you're restricting trade.
I'm restricting him. So he would say, why the hell would I come to you? You will get my money buying your stocks, and then you will prevent me having it back. So go to hell. I will not buy at yours. As simple as that. We have to have freedom in trading. This comes under the personal freedom that has been assigned and stated upon in all constitutions around the world. I cannot prevent any person to sell or buy. I cannot restrict him, because if I did so, we will hear again what we have been hearing during the 55 days of closure that we did witness early this year, and were about to lead us to be delisted from many international indices.
Moving to Egypt's net foreign reserves, which slipped to $25.71 billion in July, but economists said that there was a slowdown in the rate of the decline. Do you think that this could suggest the worst of the capital flight since Egypt's recent uprising?
No, I don't suggest so. I think we might witness a little bit harsh slip again, but it won't be soon. I still see until we finish our parliamentary elections and presidential elections and set our agenda, we still have a huge fluctuation to come. Big ups and big downs. We cannot say how much up or how much down. It depends about the conflicts between the political powers in the street. We are having now more than 10 days a disagreement. I don't want to say it's a conflict, but it's still a disagreement regarding what will happen next Friday in Tahrir Square. However, Some say no, nothing will happen. Some say no, we will have our festival or our event there. Some say there is no need. The military council is trying to be polite, actually. And I really pray to God to help them in such issue, because they are in a very delicate situation with all this disagreeing political powers.
Right. Now, Mr. Nader, how far is the fall in foreign currency assets? There was the fall, we witnessed it month on month. So it was down $859 million in July and $1.2 billion in June. These fluctuations, what do they mean?
It means that first of all, the increase between June and July from 859 million to 1.2 billion during July wasn't due to the withdrawals of foreign assets. It was due to the increase in imports for food and beverage commodities.
Right.
We have been preparing ourselves to Ramadan holy month, which we are in currently. So, as we are the Egyptians, known by the high consumption of food and mainly sweetened products in such month, and sugar is an essential commodity for the Egyptians, and it's a strategic inventory. We have to have it in our inventory. We did have to increase it again and to make more stock for such month. Meanwhile, we cannot deny that there has been withdrawals, but yet not as much as we have witnessed in February and March. What we have witnessed during this period was much, much higher of what we have seen during July. We have dropped around 11 billion till now, or a little bit less. The majority of it was during the first 3 months, February, March, April.
Right.
The rest, I don't think we have reached, if we calculated it, May was about a billion and 1.8 billion, June was 0.86, and July was 1.2. So if we added up the sum, we would find it will not exceed 5 billion. The rest of the 6 billion was distributed upon February, March, April.
April, right.
So the huge sum was back there. We won't see huge withdrawals again, but yet we are still restoring our confidence. We are restoring investors' confidence in our economy gradually, and it won't pick up faster than this unless we finish our parliamentary and presidential elections and set our agenda.
So political stability is the key.
Is the key.
On that note, Mr. Nader Khedr, investment and capital market analyst, thank you very much, sir, for joining us tonight on this edition of the Daily Debate. Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, we wrap up this edition of the Daily Debate. Many thanks for joining us, and have a very good night.
مسابقة المعارف الإسلامية. اتصل من أي خط أرضي على 0900 92 02 أو من أي محمول على 11 93 واربح 2000 جنيه كل أسبوع.